Imagine a world where millions of young men marched proudly to war, believing they would return home within weeks. Instead, the world entered one of the deadliest and most horrifying conflicts in human history. A war that destroyed empires, changed borders forever, and reshaped the future of humanity. This was World War I, often called the Great War. A conflict so massive that more than 70 million soldiers were mobilized and over 16 million people lost their lives. But how did the world fall into such chaos? How did one assassination trigger a global catastrophe? And how did this war eventually lay the foundation for World War II? Today, we're exploring the complete history of World War I, from the tensions before the war all the way to its dramatic ending in 1918. At the beginning of the 20th century, Europe looked powerful and stable on the surface. The British Empire ruled the seas. Germany had become an industrial giant. France wanted revenge after losing territory to Germany in 1871. Russia was expanding its influence, and Austria-Hungary controlled many ethnic groups across Central Europe. But beneath the surface, Europe was like a room filled with gasoline waiting for a spark. Several dangerous forces were growing at the same time. Nationalism made people extremely loyal to their nations and ethnic identities, especially in the Balkans, where many groups wanted independence from powerful empires. Militarism caused European countries to massively expand their armies and navies, while Britain and Germany competed to build the strongest military forces in the world. Imperial rivalry increased tensions as European powers fought for colonies across Africa and Asia. At the same time, alliances divided Europe into two camps. The Triple Alliance included Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy, while the Triple Entente included Britain, France, and Russia. These alliances were supposed to prevent war, but instead they guaranteed that if one country entered conflict, many others would follow. To the Austro-Hungarian throne, traveled to Sarajevo in Bosnia. At that time, Bosnia was controlled by Austria-Hungary, but many Serbian nationalists hated Austrian rule. One of these nationalists was a 19-year-old named Gavrilo Princip. Earlier that day, an assassination attempt failed, but later in the afternoon, Ferdinand's driver accidentally took a wrong turn and stopped directly in front of Princip. Seeing his chance, Princip fired 2 shots, killing Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie. At first, the assassination seemed like a regional crisis, but within weeks, Europe exploded into war. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia and declared war. Russia supported Serbia. Germany supported Austria-Hungary. France backed Russia, and Britain entered after Germany invaded Belgium. Like falling dominoes, alliances dragged country after country into the conflict, and the First World War officially began. When war started in 1914, many people celebrated. Crowds gathered in cities cheering for soldiers, and young men rushed to enlist because most believed the war would end by Christmas. Nobody understood the nightmare that was coming. Germany launched the Schlieffen Plan, a strategy designed to quickly defeat France before turning east toward Russia. German forces invaded Belgium and rapidly moved toward Paris. But at the First Battle of the Marne, French and British forces stopped the German advance. Both sides then began digging trenches, and soon the Western Front became a giant scar stretching across Europe. The trenches became symbols of World War I. Soldiers lived in freezing mud for weeks and sometimes months. They dealt with rats, disease, hunger, exhaustion, and constant fear. The trenches were narrow defensive ditches protected by barbed wire and machine guns. Between opposing trenches was a deadly area called no man's land, and crossing it often meant certain death. New technology made warfare even more horrifying. Machine guns could fire hundreds of bullets per minute. Artillery shells destroyed entire landscapes. Poison gas blinded and suffocated soldiers, and tanks made their first appearance during the war. But despite all this technology, battles often gained only a few miles of territory at enormous human cost. One of the longest battles was Verdun in 1916, where Germany attempted to bleed France white. The battle lasted 10 months and caused around 700,000 casualties. French soldiers became famous for the phrase, "They shall not pass." Then came the Battle of the Somme, where British forces launched a massive attack against German lines. On the very first day, Britain suffered around 57,000 casualties, making it one of the bloodiest days in British military history. By the battle's end, over 1 million men had been wounded or killed, yet very little land changed hands. These battles revealed the horrifying reality of industrial warfare, where human lives were consumed on an unimaginable scale. Although many people imagine World War I as a European conflict, it was truly global. Fighting spread to Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. The Ottoman Empire joined the Central Powers, opening new fronts across the Middle East. One famous campaign was Gallipoli in 1915, where Britain and its allies attempted to capture the Dardanelles Strait from the Ottomans. The campaign became a disaster, and thousands of soldiers from Australia and New Zealand, known as the Anzacs, died there. Meanwhile, Arab groups revolted against Ottoman rule with British support, and a figure known as Lawrence of Arabia became famous during these campaigns. At sea, German submarines called U-boats attacked Allied ships, turning the oceans into another deadly battlefield. For most of the war, the United States stayed neutral, but several events changed American opinion. Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare sank civilian ships, including the Lusitania in 1915. Then came the Zimmermann telegram, in which Germany secretly proposed an alliance with Mexico against the United States. When Americans discovered this message, public anger exploded. In 1917, President Woodrow Wilson asked Congress for a declaration of war against Germany, and the United States officially entered World War I. Fresh American troops, supplies, and industrial power gave new strength to the exhausted Allies, becoming a major turning point in the war. While the Allies gained America, the Central Powers gained something else. Russia collapsed internally after years of war caused hunger, economic disaster, and massive casualties. The Russian people lost faith in Tsar Nicholas II. In 1917, revolution erupted and the Tsar was overthrown. Later that year, the Bolsheviks led by Vladimir Lenin seized power and immediately sought peace. Russia signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany in 1918 and left the war. This allowed Germany to move many troops to the Western Front and launch one final massive offensive before American forces fully arrived. At first, the offensive succeeded, but eventually Germany ran out of strength. By late 1918, Germany faced disaster. Its economy was collapsing. Food shortages spread across the country, and soldiers were exhausted. The Allies, reinforced by American troops, launched powerful counterattacks known as the 100 Days Offensive. Germany began retreating, and its allies started surrendering one by one. Austria-Hungary collapsed, the Ottoman Empire surrendered, and protests erupted inside Germany itself. The German Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated and fled the country. Finally, on November 11, 1918, an armistice was signed, and at exactly 11 a.m., the guns fell silent. After 4 years of unimaginable destruction, World War I was finally over. The war left Europe devastated. Entire cities were destroyed, and millions of soldiers returned home wounded or traumatized. Many never returned at all. 4 major empires disappeared forever: the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and the Russian Empire. New countries emerged across Europe and the Middle East. In 1919, world leaders met at the Paris Peace Conference, where the Treaty of Versailles became the most important agreement. Germany was blamed for the war and forced to pay massive reparations. Its military was heavily restricted, and large amounts of territory were lost. Many Germans viewed the treaty as deeply humiliating, and this anger would later help Adolf Hitler rise to power. In many ways, World War I planted the seeds for World War II. World War I changed warfare forever. It showed how modern technology could turn conflict into industrial-scale destruction. More than 16 million people died, and millions more were wounded. An entire generation was scarred physically and emotionally. Poets and writers described the war as meaningless slaughter, while families across the world lost fathers, brothers, sons, and friends. Even after the war ended, a deadly influenza pandemic spread globally, killing millions more. The world would never be the same again. World War I began with a single assassination. But underneath that event were years of tension, rivalry, militarism, and political ambition. What started as a European conflict became a global catastrophe that reshaped borders, governments, economies, and human history itself. It destroyed empires, created revolutions, changed warfare forever, and set the stage for an even deadlier conflict just 2 decades later. The Great War remains one of history's most important lessons about the dangers of nationalism, unchecked alliances, and global conflict. Because sometimes the smallest spark can ignite the entire world.